Hello everyone and welcome back to Analyzing Discourse, Understanding Communication Part 2. In this shorter session, I will give you a very brief overview of an approach called social actor analysis. Social actor analysis was developed by Theo van Leeuwen, and it looks at how social actors, or more commonly known as people, are represented, especially in the media. So this was Theo van Leeuwen's original approach, looking at media texts. His original approach involved both looking at both texts and images. Now, the approach I brought today and the reading that you will be doing on your own is kind of a to-go version, an easier version. Theo van Leeuwen's social actor analysis is quite complex. You can have a look at the original approach, obviously, but what I'm trying to do with this model is to give you a toolkit to start working with texts. And I find that this toolkit can have very interesting ways of entering textual data, and students usually like it, so hopefully you will too. So what does social actor theory does? It looks at how people are represented, and the reason why it looks at how people are represented, because these representations can tell a lot about how various groups are favored, why various groups are favored in politics or in the media, and how these representations, how we talk about these groups, can lead to different ways of thinking about them. So a social actor approach, we can break it down to 3 steps. So first of all, identifying social actors, so finding language in the text about how social actors are talked about. Then we can look at ideologies or look at intention. So we connect the small d discourse, the text features, with the why and the how. Now, identifying social actors, we can look at 3 things: who is absent or who is present, implicitly or explicitly. And if people are present, if people are talked about, how are they talked about? Are they active? Are they passive? Are they made personal or impersonal? And then looking at what is the relationship between communicator and the audience and various third parties. Now, don't let the following slides scare you. As I said, this is a very complex model, and you're not expected to understand this based on these slides alone. I will give you a brief overview with some examples, but the main task for you after this video is to actually sit down and read the chapter and develop a better understanding. Again, don't be overwhelmed. You don't have to remember every word. What you need to remember is some phenomena and some ways of representing or not representing, backgrounding, and various approaches that, various strategies that people can take when they talk about social actors in a text. But nonetheless, don't be overwhelmed. So, looking at representations, who is absent, who is implicitly or explicitly present. Now, of course, and the most important thing is if certain groups are not present at all. There is no reference to social actors in the text. So take for example, this sentence: the level of support for stopping immigration was at post-war high. Now you can see here, the level of support is a noun. The level of support is a noun phrase. What we don't know from this sentence is who is supporting this? Who are these people? Who is this group? How many are there who are supporting this? Now, exclusion can also happen through what we call backgrounding. So when we read a text, and we can kind of figure out who the actors are, but if they're not explicitly mentioned. So, for example, the suspect is remanded into custody. Here, we can infer from general knowledge that we're talking about police, because normally suspects and custody are linked to police. So backgrounding of a phenomenon is when we can figure out who we're talking about, but they're not explicitly mentioned in the text. Now the next one, if they're represented, are they portrayed as active or passive participants. Now, if they are represented as active, there is some sort of dynamic force. So, for example, in this sentence, people felt besieged by immigration. So you can see how here immigrants are activated, even though they don't say what immigrants did, but the verb besiege or attack is a very active word. So this group, immigrants, although they're not explicitly mentioned, they are still activated because they are represented as an active force. Passivation is a process where actors are represented being at the receiving end of some action. So, for example, subjection is a strategy where social actors are represented as passive. So, for example, I asked her personal assistant. So, in this case, personal assistant is the recipient of someone else's action. I am active. Somebody else's personal assistant is the passive subject of my actions. Beneficialization is a similar process, but here those who are mentioned are actually on a receiving end and they benefit from the action. So I can say I was given an ultimatum which then led. So ultimatum, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is not a best example. Ultimatum can be good and bad, but you can see how being given something, I am not the active doer. I'm not an active person in this. I am at the receiving end of that ultimatum. So moving on to how social actors are referred to. There are different ways. Individualization, we will see it next, but there is something what we call assimilation. So when people are referred to as groups, so things like migrants, staff, legal community, and sometimes we don't even use the words. We just say, I mean, in the UK there is this big reference now to the Brexit vote, and you can say the 48%. It's not even a name. It's not even a linguistic label. It's just a number. So we call this aggregation. So collectivization is when we refer to people using names, for collective nouns. Aggregation is when we actually just use numbers. So this is what we call assimilation. Individualization is when social actors are actually made individual. So nomination is when we use their name. And categorization is when we talk about these social actors, not in terms of their name, but in terms of who they are or what they represent. You can see here the examples. Functionalization is when we talk about their activity, like lawyer or mother of five. Or identification when we talk about features that represent them, like the thugs, or youngsters, age, nationality, skin color, religion. You will find this, especially if you're looking at texts about people, you will find many of these in them. Moving on, talking about personal in personal ways. So when we don't talk about people in personal ways, we can use abstract language. So let's compare these two sentences here. The new plant manager seems incompetent. You can see here the social actor is the plant manager and it's individualized. We know this is the function, but nonetheless we know about the person. Compare this with the sentence, proceedings at the plant have suffered from managerial incompetence. Yeah, from this structure, the manager is completely missing. There is no reference to a person. There is just a noun here, incompetence. We don't know whose incompetence this is, so we call this abstraction. And objectivation is when we replace people with objects, like the report illustrates, the proceedings have shown, the book talks about. So you can see how here we use objects instead of social actors. Now, remember, there are 3 steps to look at social actors, but how they are referred to, and we can also look at how they relate to one another what's the relationship between communicator, audience, and third parties. You can look at different types of language here, of course. One interesting one is the pronoun we. Because as you can see on this diagram, we can mean many, many things. So you can see we can refer to the communicator. It's marked with number 1 on the slide. So this is what we call the exclusive we. So this basically just refers to the communicator. It's the royal we. The Queen talks like this, but some people like to talk about themselves in plural. Then we have, when we talk about the audience only, it's number 2. This is like, we are clear about this, right? So I don't necessarily mean me and you guys. When I say we're clear about this, I actually mean you only, my audience. So this is a bit demeaning. Yes, it's a kind of a command as well, because obviously I'm not talking about myself, I'm only talking about you. And some aspects of this kind of we may also call secondary baby talk. You may find this in, I don't know, when you talk about when you hear carers talk to older people. Would we like our soup now? Obviously the carer doesn't want to eat soup, they're just talking to the older person. So talking about the communicator and the audience together, this is what we call an inclusive we. Here the communicator refers to everybody who is part of the interaction. We are covering social actor theory together, you guys and me, so we're both included. Now number 4, that we, communicator and the third party, is when what we call institutional we. So here the relationship is the communicator represents some other people. Number 5 is communicator, third parties, and audience, and this is when the communicator represents an organization and the audience comes from the same organization as well. And finally, number 6 is what we call general we. We as in people. We can't wait for the vaccination to take place. General we. So looking at we is only one way of looking at the relationship between the communicator, the audience, and third parties. We is a very useful way into it, but of course you can look at other words and try expose those relationships. Now, we looked at various ways and various strategies of representing or not representing, personalizing and not personalizing actors in a text. Why is it useful? Well, if we look closely, what we can see is looking at, for example, the communicator's intentions. For example, if we exclude or only imply social actors, that's a very good strategy to limit blame or shift responsibility or influence readers and listeners and change their minds about certain situations. This is a very strong kind of propaganda as well. If we refer to actors in personal or impersonal ways, we can reveal intentions that the speaker has about the roles and how they envisage that relationship between speaker and the audience. Various strategies can emphasize similarities. You will find this in political speeches or public texts. Talking to the reader or a listener using language which emphasizes similarities, creating a common ground, but it can also be used to highlight differences, the kind of rhetoric that emphasizes the difference between us and them. So maybe it's a good task for you to try and listen out to some of the political speeches that happen in the next couple of weeks. So maybe you can spot ways of referring to certain groups. Obviously immigration is a big issue in your context as well. Various types of difference. So I can imagine there's a lot of rhetorical work happening in the media to portray these people in certain ways. So remember the 3-step model. So our social actor theory will allow you to zoom in on social actors, see how people are portrayed or not portrayed and in what ways, and that can help you expose ideologies or big D discourses and or recognize the communicator's intentions. So to really dig deep in this, you will need to read this chapter 10b in the textbook. This gives you a very detailed explanation. Plus, it also does this through the Avon mission statement. So those of you who are interested in business or corporate texts will find this very interesting. And we are actually going to look at a similar text together in the webinar when we're going to try out our newly acquired knowledge. So on the slides you can find the references that I used in the talk, and on the website you can find other suggested readings for critical discourse analysis or social actor analysis. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I hope you will come to the webinar ready to do some analysis together. Bye.